Good afternoon. My name is Brent Schwan, and I'm a friend of the Uhlman family. I'm joined by Judy Kellog Jacobson and Jake Seiner up here, and we'd like to share with you the story of James McEwen Uhlman, more affectionately known as Mac. By any standard, Mac was truly a historic figure in the North Dakota ranching community, and we'd like to share that with you. He was born in Chelsea, Nova Scotia on April 11th, 1854. And in 1878, he married Millie Dean Janes, and he worked with his family in the lumber and pulpwood industry in Nova Scotia. In 1884, he and a large number of his family immigrated to River Falls, Wisconsin. Mac and his brother started a successful horse breeding and sales business there, and he became an American citizen in 1886. This is a family picture because in 1891, Mac decided to leave the unorganized territory of North Dakota after an unsuccessful business venture in Wisconsin. And he selected the area that we currently know as McKenzie County to trap beaver, knowing that there was high demand for beaver pelts in the eastern United States, and it would be an easy way to start making some money. And he took this family picture prior to leaving, knowing that his family would be settled back in Wisconsin and being educated there. Eventually, they had another son born to the family. During his first 2 years trapping beaver in North Dakota, he encountered two large cattle companies, Stroud Brothers and Landers and Green. They were running cattle in the area, and Mac came across them and joined in with the cowboys. This is likely where he learned his knowledge and love for ranching. In 1893, he and his family members purchased the second largest ranch in the county from the Morning Star Cattle Company, and called it the Morning Star Cattle Company, and they purchased it from Landers and Green. The company was located along the Big Missouri River, and they ran 800 to 900 head of cattle in McKenzie County. The family members who chose to buy into the ranch were also the family members that followed him from Nova Scotia to Wisconsin and ultimately to North Dakota. And that tells us a lot about Mac's character, because the people that knew him the best were the same people that believed in him the most. And they knew he was a man that they could trust and a man that they could believe in, and they started to believe in his dream of ranching in North Dakota, and they followed him. And when Mac got things going, obviously he needed to identify his cattle from the other herds, and he and his nephew created the Bird Head brand. And in your booklets you can see that brand. It was put on many cattle owned by the Morning Star Cattle Company, which later became known as the Bird Head Ranch. This is the oldest brand in North Dakota, and it's currently owned and used by Mac's great-great-grandson, so his legacy still lives on in North Dakota. When Mac started farming and ranching, he knew he had to figure out a couple problems. Obviously, one was trying to keep cattle alive in North Dakota during our harsh winters. And the second was to limit the death of cattle and calves due to the large gray wolves and coyotes that are found his cattle as easy prey. So first, Mac had to make sure the cattle had something to eat and live on in the winter months. So he cut hay all summer long, and he put some cowboys to work moving cattle to greener pastures in the summertime. But he assigned some cowboys basically just to be hay hands for the summer. And you can see they were moving a lot of hay, which is obviously required to feed that many cattle. But his second problem with the wolves and coyotes actually led to one of his more interesting ideas. And he started bringing in greyhound dogs. Greyhound dogs are the second fastest animal on earth behind cheetahs. And he kept 12 to 14 of these working dogs on the ranch at all times, and he would put them out amongst the cattle. He raised and trained them himself, and in 1 year, those hounds killed 350 coyotes and 37 large gray wolves. And so it was quite a solution to a big problem. He was also very innovative from the standpoint that 1 year the Morning Star Cattle Company received a shipment of cattle from Weevil, Montana, and they drove them back to the ranch. And at some point, Mac realized that the cattle were losing weight from lice, fleas, and grubs and things like that, and it led him to design a way to dip the cattle. And they built a trench in an area that was at that time called Ragged Butte. It's currently Alexander, North Dakota. And they built a large trench that was 75 feet long, 5 feet wide, and 8 feet deep. And they used greased galvanized steel as a floor, and when the cows would step on it, they would slide down the chute, basically, and into the water, and they would have to swim through the creosote and the dip to come out the other side. And it wasn't long before other ranchers were using their services. After 11 years with that Morningstar Cattle Company, Mac sold his interest in it, and he homesteaded east of Schaefer, North Dakota, which is just outside Watford City. There, he really left another legacy in that they started the first school in McKenzie County, what is now McKenzie County, and his second oldest daughter was the first teacher in McKenzie County. So it went beyond the cattle industry. At that point, he purchased a couple properties. One was over by Demick Lake, northeast of Watford City. He purchased that property because there was great potential for hay there. And of course, that was a big thing for him, feeding calves through the winter. There was also a very good spring there. And as a rancher who took pride in feeding and caring for his stock during the winter months, Mac liked to tell his children that he did not believe in letting his cattle eat snowballs. He wanted to have good water for them. We have a picture of them actually feeding there, I believe, right?
No, that's not.
No? Okay. So,
That's in the big book.
okay, that's in the big book. So the second purchase he made is maybe a little more influential. He purchased a ranch north of Arnegard, North Dakota for $7,000. And this ranch was located on the Big Missouri River, just down the river from where the Birdhead Ranch was. And his wife, Millie, was able to homestead on some land adjacent to that. They knew that this was the land of their dreams, that the ranch of their dreams at that point. And so they set out to build it to the visions that he had. And this is what ultimately became the Uhlman Ranch. The plans for the ranch included a barn, corrals, a squeeze chute that he developed, and a new home for the family. Being a true cowboy, Mac built the barns and the corrals first, and the family's dwelling came second. Lumber was plentiful along the river bottoms at that time because that was prior to, obviously, Lake Sakakawea being formed. And with the knowledge from being raised in the lumber industry, he built barns and corrals. He built the squeeze chute that he developed. And he also had extensive corrals, and there's a picture that with really the sheer number of horses that they had. And as much as cows, he loved horses. With all the homesteaders that were moving into that area, it kind of began the end of the free grazing period. And so it became Mac's goal to start raising some quality saddle horses. Cowboys had many miles to cover, and it was their only method of transportation, obviously, in that area. And so after his barns and corrals were built in 1908, Mac headed to Louisville, Kentucky to start a horse breeding experiment. And he purchased a thoroughbred stallion and 4 thoroughbred mares, and brought them back to North Dakota. And his good breeding lines were evidenced in many of McKenzie County saddle horses for years. But it extended beyond that, beyond North Dakota. There was a Pennsylvania newspaper article dated in 1911 that states Mac Uhlman had done more, perhaps, than any other man for the slope country in advancing high-grade and thoroughbred stock raising, but his work was carried out so quietly that few realized its extent. Cattle by the trainload grazed on his ranch, and his horses included 2 distinct classes, trotting and draft stock. His foundation stock originated in the famous horse breeding section of Kentucky, and his draft horses were principally of the Percheron breed. So his influence went well beyond just North Dakota. In the fall of 1910, he combined with 4 other ranchers to drive 1,100 head of cattle to the Great Northern Railroad near Dickinson. In the past, they'd tried to get those cattle to cross the Missouri River, which is obviously a challenge in those days. They would hold water from those cows for 2 days, and then they would bring them down to the river, hope that they would take to the water and get to swimming. And if they didn't, they'd have to start the whole process all over. And so Mac worked hard to get ranchers more options for delivery and better selling price. He felt that the railroad was not making it fair and productive for ranchers, and he even brought a suit against the Great Northern Railroad Company demanding payment of $1,990 for cattle that he felt were injured because of poor stock conditions that they were held in. He believed in keeping people accountable and even the railroads. So with homesteaders moving into Mackenzie County, Mac saw the need to develop a different type of horse, one that could be used for new farmers. He wanted them strong, but also fast, easy, moving draft horses. So in 1911, he made plans to travel to Europe and purchased horses of the draft type for breeding. And he sold some cattle and had letters of credit to purchase those horses. He contacted the Horse Breeding and Sales Association of Mr. C. Joy and the Sons of Belgium, and he visited many, many stock shows and looked at hundreds and hundreds of horses until he had 13 head that he felt were worthy to come back to North Dakota. He explained to Mr. Joy that I want to have good ones, and the best is none too good, and if it takes you some extra time, I'll make it right also. If you see anything wrong that I don't, I want you to tell me. And so he was very, very set on only bringing the best quality back here. And there's a picture of his favorite stallion, Flavion Devald, that you can see in the book. He's a 3-year-old stallion that was described as very big boned and an extraordinary mover, just a real beauty. And that's just a hulk of a horse when you look at him. Max was so excited about these animals that he wanted to exhibit them at the Chicago World's Fair that year. And so he returned from France with the animals, and they hopped on an express train from New York to Chicago to get there in time. And the men rode him back in the horse car with the horses to groom them and keep them quiet. However, on a foggy morning of December 6, 1911, disaster happened in Pennsylvania, and that freight train and an express train collided, and it sent the train down a 20-foot embankment, and the horse carriage along with it. Everybody on board was killed, including Mac, and $50,000 worth of horses that at today's dollar would be like $1.371 million. He was good friends with the Lieutenant Governor of North Dakota, who went to the scene for his family, reclaimed his remains, brought him back to North Dakota. There's a picture of the last picture taken of Mac with his family is in here. But in the short time he was here, he was able to be very successful in a very harsh environment. And newspaper accounts of his death put his estate worth about $250,000 at that time. That was a tremendous amount of money. So he went through ranching from 1893 to 1911 in Mackenzie County, went through floods, snowstorms, blizzards, virtually everything you can think of. And came through it all. And the last thing I want to say is that on the back page of this is a picture, the last picture of Mac taken in Paris, probably the last picture of him taken ever. And the words that Emery H. Joy wrote to the family about Mac's last days in Europe, and that was the guy that he dealt with in Europe a lot on the horses, I think are very telling of the man. And he wrote that it's a pity when coming to the last and fatal moment, all is destroyed that was done in the past, that which held so much promise for the future. He, Mac, was the straightest man I ever dealt with. I look at it, that the Lord calls them deemed to be worthy. I know he was prepared to appear before the one who granted them a few years in this world where his memory will never be forgotten. So his influence went far beyond just his business dealings. He was a great man, and people realized that.
I'm Judy Kellog Jacobson. I'm the great-granddaughter of Mac, and we, the family of James Uhlman Mac, would believe that he deserves this honor of the pre-40s just because of his legacy that he left behind. He believed, he came here to North Dakota on a business failure, and he came back showing us that never give up on your dream. If you want to raise cows in North Dakota, because that was his dream, and he succeeded. Don't ever quit on your dream. So for that reason, I would really like him to be involved in the Cowboy Hall of Fame. And I also would like you, if you like old-time stories and pictures, we have them all in the Black Book. Thank you very much.